The orchards in the green hole weren't arranged in the same way as any orchard one would find in the human-inhabited lands above the Great Tomb of Nazarick. Rather than being planted in parallel rows, the fruit trees radiated from a set of central points. At each of those central points was the home tree of one of the resident dryads. Ludmilla could only presume that the orchard took this form because the range of their caretakers was limited. Does the distance that a dryad can be from their home tree increase as they age? Ludmilla asked. For some reason, Chief Perlia shuddered like a lone sapling in the autumn wind. Her oaken leaves trembled and one of them even fell to the grass. Ludmilla's gaze went from the fallen leaf to Lord Mayor. Is she dying? She asked. I'm not dying. The dryad screeched. When we came here, they ran all sorts of experiments on us. Some of them. Chief Perlia clutched her head, a low moan escaping from her wooden lips. They weren't that bad, Lord Mayor said. We needed to figure out how to design a green hole. Knowing how far the dryads could be from their trees was a part of that. All we did was have them stand further and further away. Then, when they showed signs of stress from being too far from their trees, we tried to figure out how long they could survive and whether getting further made things worse. It was horrible. Chief Perlia continued to moan. I could feel my life ebbing away from me. I got so tired, cold, but they only kept asking more and more questions. They don't lose health during the process, Lord Mayor said, so healing magic doesn't counteract the effect. Neither do spells that restore stamina or remove debuffs. I was dying, the dryad cried, hugging herself anxiously. They wouldn't let me go back to my tree. Lady Aura just held on to me until I collapsed. I know you guys are all world-ending threats that don't die even when you're killed, but I'm just a poor little dryad. I don't know what you expected out of me. Didn't we conduct a similar experiment in Warden's Vale? Ludmilla asked. Chief Perlia backed away, looking fearfully at Ludmilla. She let out a startled cry when her shoulders bumped into her home tree. A moment later, she phased into it. Lord Mayor nodded. Glaza didn't complain, though. She just told us how she was feeling. I did, too. Chief Perlia said. Wait, Glaza? The dryad's head popped out of the trunk of her oak with an entirely different expression from before. Do you know of her? Ludmilla asked. Do I ever? The dryad huffed. That woman's been the source of all of my troubles recently. A furrow crossed Ludmilla's brow. Glaza always had her tree with her so she could theoretically go anywhere she wanted, but, as far as Ludmilla knew, she had never left the boundaries of her territory. Glaza is causing you trouble? Ludmilla said. How so? How? Chief Perlia stepped out of her tree again, placing her hands on her hips. I'll tell you how. Many sunrises ago, Lady Aura appeared after returning from the surface and had us dryads gather before her. Then, she said all right and started whipping us. We tried to run, but we obviously couldn't get far, so all we could do was cry and wonder if she was going to turn us into kindling. The more we cried, the angrier she got, so I eventually thought to at least ask why she was attacking us before we died. Apparently, she met a superior dryad named Glaza somewhere and she wanted us all to be like her. Ludmilla's lip twitched at the feeling that stirred within her. Was this how parents felt when their children performed well? Glaza has been working hard every day, Ludmilla said. Isn't self-improvement something that everyone should strive for? No. Chief Perlia looked at her strangely. Why would I want to do that? Soaking up sunlight and absorbing the delicious dirt here is good enough. Sinner. A sinner stood before her, brazenly displaying her sinful nature for all to see. It was no wonder that Lady Aura had resorted to whipping her. I thought that dryads had a natural desire to protect their trees, Ludmilla said. Wouldn't you want to train to do at least that? That's right, Lord Mayor said. Glaza's not only been learning how to use her natural strengths as a dryad, but she's training to become a druid, as well. Didn't you say that you liked the magic I used to enchant the soil? You could learn it too. But you can already cast it, Chief Perlia said. Ludmilla's hand itched to slap Pinnison. As far as personalities went, hers was the type that she despised the most. A shield of civil conduct allowed them to do as they pleased, but, when their families and communities pooled resources to pull through a crisis, it was revealed that people such as Pinnison had little to offer. Her interactions with the residents of Lady Shiltier's domain led her to believe that all of Nazarick's denizens possessed a similar sense of diligence, but that clearly wasn't the case. In that case, Ludmilla said, what is it that you do here? I'm the chief of the Green Hole, the Dryad replied matter-of-factly. Yes, but what does that entail? Being a boss, Chief Perlia crossed her arms with an authoritative look. I'm in charge of collecting tributes to Ainzul Gaon, as well. The Dryad gestured to several crates of produce placed on a stone slab nearby. As far as Ludmilla could tell, all of the fruits and vegetables were unblemished and high quality, but ultimately mundane. A Dryad can't stray too far from her tree, Ludmilla said. So how did you collect the tribute? Everyone else brought it in, so what part did you play? I managed them. Chief Perlia raised her chin proudly. It's a tough job, but I'm not the chief for nothing. The self-proclaimed chief seemed entirely serious in her statement. Ludmilla held back the mountain of things that she had to say, as it probably wouldn't lead anywhere if the Dryad displayed no fear of the consequences of behaving as she did in Lord Mayor's presence. Does this tribute serve any specific purpose? Ludmilla decided to divert to a different line of discourse, for instance, being sent to the Treasury to help finance Nazarik's operations? Sure. Chief Perlia nodded. Yes, that's exactly what happens. Isn't it great? It actually goes to the 9th floor, Lord Mayor said. The kitchen staff uses it to make dishes for the cafeteria buffet. What is the point of this person? Ludmilla's gaze went from the Dryad, who pointedly looked away, to Lord Mayor. She reached out to draw Lord Mayor into a private discussion, but one of his elf maids slapped her hand away. My lord, is it acceptable to have someone like this as a chief? Even an uneducated girl from a farming village could do better than her. Lord Mayor stared at her. Had she violated an unspoken point of etiquette by using an ability to speak directly with him? The Green Hole is one big experiment, he replied after a moment, so the result is the result. She couldn't help but wonder if Chief Perlia was at least a part of the reason why the administration's elder liches seemed to look down on everyone. Hopefully, the nobles and their magistrates in the Sorceress Kingdom had clearly shown the difference between an official administrator and the lazy Dryad standing in front of her. Anyway, Lord Mayor said, we should keep going. Past this orchard is the meadow where most of the plant-type heteromorphs live. Ludmilla fell into step beside Lord Mayor, or at least as close as she could get with the three maids protecting him. The other Dryads working in their respective parts of the orchard watched them curiously as they passed, but didn't approach them. Is there any particular reason why you're keeping the resident races separate, my lord? Ludmilla asked. The residents of the Green Hole are mostly from the Great Forest of Tob, the Dark Elf answered. They didn't know how to live with other races before we brought them here. We had to be extra careful of the plant-type heteromorphs since they're powerful and dangerous relative to races like lizardmen. Now that she thought about it, she couldn't think of any plant-type heteromorphs that weren't predatory or parasitic. Pretty much any living thing could be food or rendered into fertilizer. Not only were they incentivized to attack animals that wandered too close, but they also had the tools to capture and kill their prey. Even as a newborn Dryad, Glaza had potent natural weapons and was far stronger than the average beastman who had invaded a draconic kingdom. Have there been any incidents? No. Everyone keeps to themselves unless someone brings them together for something. Trying to get different races to live in harmony is pretty hard when they stick to their respective territories. Everyone just has a preferred habitat and each race's instincts make them wary of one another. The lizardmen, for instance, are averse to forests, so they won't even enter the orchard. They don't like farming in the fields, either. Could it be that the farming experiments haven't gotten very far because the races involved don't have any aptitude for it? Aptitude? From what I've read, the races here don't have any restrictions on production-type job classes. Some of them are showing production bonuses from getting job class levels, so it isn't as if they aren't getting anywhere at all. Since the average human farmer in the region doesn't seem to be doing much better, I figured it's just something that takes time. It was difficult to prove, either way. Farming in the region was as mundane could be. No one ever spoke of prodigy farmers like one might speak of prodigy adventurers or even a renowned artisan. In fact, no farmer ever gained much more fame than raising a prize hog or growing the largest pumpkin at the local harvest fair, which was usually forgotten by the time the next fair rolled around. This was decidedly strange considering that farming households made up over 90% of the population. One would think that there would be plenty of examples by virtue of having the largest sample size. Instead, farming was considered a provincial occupation with absolutely no expectation of anything out of the ordinary attached. Have you considered the next step for the farmers in Warden's Vale? Ludmilla asked. There's actually a problem with that. Have they not shown sufficient progress in their job class growth, my lord? You'd know better than me about that, Lord Mayor replied. What I was referring to was a problem on our end. None of the second-tier plants that we have are suited for large-scale agriculture. Lord Mayor stopped at the edge of the orchard, scanning a flowering meadow that stretched to the fringes of the green hole. After a moment, he walked through the grass and stopped in front of a low-lying shrub. It appeared to be a species of low-growing juniper aside from the fact that it was bright pink instead of the usual blue-green. This is Maiden's Fancy, Lord Mayor told her. It produces second-tier berries that can be harvested once an hour, my lord? Most people would probably think it's a miracle plant and do what they can to raise crops of it, but the problem is that it only grows in certain spots. You may have noticed other plants around the green hole that sort of stick out like this. Ludmilla nodded. The forest that once stood where the green hole was had been cut down, but eye-catching plants that weren't part of the new crops could still be seen here and there. That's because the green hole used to be a forest. Those plants were resource nodes within that forest. I think you've seen similar things in the wilderness. There are specific locations where special plants may be harvested, Ludmilla replied, but my lord is the first person I've ever heard refer to them as resource nodes. And they certainly cannot be harvested once an hour. At best, it's once a week for the more prolific plants. As if on cue, the bunches of green berries on the plant turned a bright shade of indigo. Ludmilla backed away as a familiar-looking being ambled over on a carriage of vines and roots. An all-rounder. We have a colony of them from the great forest of Tob, Lord Mayor nodded. Sitting atop her huge red blossom, the all-rounder lowered herself to pick the berries from the Maiden's Fancy and placed them into a woven basket. The plant-type heteromorph was about half the size of the one she had killed in the blister, but it would likely be seen by the neighboring countries as a deadly monster that required a gold-rank adventurer team to dispatch. This one, however, paid neither Lord Mayor nor Ludmilla any mind as she slowly went about her work. What happens if you plant the seeds from this plant? Ludmilla asked. They don't germinate unless they're sown in the same spots, Lord Mayor answered. I tried to grow seeds from every plant here in a few dozen locations around the Sorceress Kingdom and none of them would sprout. It was pretty disappointing. When I saw that we could raise plants from the outside in here, I thought we might be able to do it the other way around. If that's the case, Ludmilla said, what about those plants you're having Glaza take care of? And there's Glaza's tree, for that matter. The all-rounder finished harvesting and moved on. Lord Mayor led them back to the dirt path crossing the meadow. After my first few tries failed, Lord Mayor said, I did some research in Ashurbanipol and decided to try making cuttings, instead. They looked like they were doing fine at first, but then they all stopped growing at around the same size. The tree that I put in Warden's Vale is the only one that kept growing. The same thing happened with the other cuttings. You've seen the plants that I put on top of Crawling Castle, right? Yes, my lord. Lord Mayor had put a great deal of thought into designing Clara's rooftop garden, but none of the plants that he transplanted seemed to grow. At first, Ludmilla figured that they needed to adapt to their new environment, but it had been months since then. The only rule that I've figured out for sure so far is that those plants will die if they aren't around a divine ash, Lord Mayor said. Have you asked anyone else about it? Big Sis and I are supposed to be the experts on this kind of stuff. I have some theories, but I'm still trying to think of ways to test them. What are they? The first is that it has to do with Glaza. She's the obvious difference between her tree and the rest of the cuttings, after all. I know Pinnison and the others seem pretty lazy, but they do have the means to tend to their trees. Glaza might be so diligent because she has to work extra hard to make her tree grow. She might be leveling the tree by leveling herself. As far as theories went, it started reasonably enough, but, by the end of it, she wasn't sure what to think. Glaza didn't seem to pay any special attention to her tree. If anything, the Death Knight carrying it around kept a closer eye on it. Even if that was the case, Ludmilla noted, it doesn't explain how she was born in the first place. Yeah, which brings us to another theory. The high positive energy state of your area is making the growth of the tree possible. The excess positive energy seems to infuse all of the living things there and that seems to influence their health and growth. The cutting's growth could have been induced by the same process, or maybe it's like a supplement? It could even be that it isn't the same tree as the one that I brought in anymore. Like a magical mutation or something. Could trees do that? Nothing indicated that they could, but a powerful druid would know better than she did. What does that mean, my lord? She asked, practically speaking. Dunno, Lord Mayor shrugged. All I know is that it looked like there was a set of rules regarding all of the different divine ash cuttings, but Glaz's tree broke the rules. It could mean some promising things, but it's too soon to tell. Anyway, one of the things I want to try is... A strange chime sounded from the skies above, followed by the voice of Lady Aura. Testing? The Nazarick Grand Tournament will resume in 30 minutes. For those who are attending the matches, please enter the arena in an orderly manner. No fighting over seats. The announcement ended with an audible click. I guess we'll have to continue later, Lord Mayor said. Thank you for taking the time to entertain me so far, my lord, Ludmilla replied. Where is the arena that Lady Aura mentioned? Lord Mayor pointed with his staff. Those tower-like things sticking up above the trees over there are a part of it, he told her. If we fly, it should take less than 5 minutes to get there. A chorus of dismayed voices accompanied them as they rose into the air. Lord Mayor had cast flight magic on himself, but hadn't done the same for his maids. Please take care of yourself, Lord Mayor. Don't let the human ambush you on the way. If she attacks you, run away as fast as you can and call for help. Just what do they expect me to do with him? If you don't mind my asking, Lord Mayor, Ludmilla said as they skimmed over the treetops, why are your maids so hostile against humans? Probably because they were once slaves to a human, Lord Mayor replied. They didn't seem to enjoy the experience. Where were they originally from? The great forest of Ivasha. They were prisoners of war taken by the theocracy. Alessia framed things as if the elves had been the instigators of the war between the Elven Kingdom in Ivasha and the slain theocracy, but Ludmilla supposed that the underlying reasons for the conflict wouldn't offer any consolation to the former slaves. It was a shame that such a valuable source of information about the lands to the south was seemingly closed off to her. Have they spoken much about their homes? Ludmilla asked. They must have expressed at least some interest in returning after the conflict between the Elf Kingdom and the theocracy is settled. Of course, if the war resulted in the annexation of the Elf Kingdom, that was a different story. They don't talk about their homes at all, Lord Mayor answered. All they seem to do is try to take care of me and Big Sis. They aren't very good at it. What did they do before? The one with blue hair is a cleric, the blonde is a druid, and the pink-haired one is ranger. The worker who owned them dragged them around to use as support casters and sex slaves. Ludmilla grimaced at his response. Never mind being a source of general information about the Elf Kingdom, they were also windows on its religion, culture, and ecology. If they had been soldiers, there was also an opportunity to collect military intelligence. They seem like a wellspring of information about our neighbors in the south, Ludmilla said. Neighbors. The great forest of Ivasha is on the southern border of the Abelian wilderness, isn't it? I thought it was on the theocracy border. That doesn't mean it can't border both, my lord. Anyway, what I meant was that they're potentially a good source of useful information now that we've expanded our sphere of influence in that direction. I guess? I haven't asked, though. She frowned slightly at the Dark Elf's response. Was it simply due to the mentality of people who lived underground? It was evident in the early defensive doctrines of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, as well. At the same time, it was hardly Lady Aura or Lord Mayor's realm of responsibility. Foreign Affairs would probably know better. She would have to ask Florine about it when she had the chance. As the towers loomed closer, the forest gave way to a clearing where stands with festive displays formed a single lane leading to the arena. There were neither stand operators nor festival goers present, so Ludmilla could only assume that everyone had gone to spectate the tournament. So these 3 elves battle slaves, or something like that? Ludmilla asked. Why become regular maids, if so? Surely they would serve better in other capacities. We told them that they didn't need to, Lord Mayor answered, but they insisted on becoming our personal servants. It's almost as if they think their survival depends on it. They've probably messed up their builds with maid levels by now. Aren't maids rather versatile? Those in His Majesty's household boast a wide variety of specializations. Ludmilla waited for him to elaborate, but they arrived at their destination before he did. The horn-like structures that Lord Mayor had pointed out back at the field of flowers loomed high overhead, but didn't seem to serve any particular purpose. Below them, an arena not unlike the Grand Arena in our winter hosted a multitude of races excitedly awaiting the main event. Lord Mayor circled the edge of the arena partway before alighting on the topmost level of seating. They made their way down the nearest set of stairs and a queasy feeling came over her as they approached a grand pavilion flanked by members of the Sorcerer King's household. She eyed the seating on the opposite side of the field. "Lord Mayor," she said, "I should find a place more suited to my station." "Eh? But..." Someone bumped into her from the side. She froze as she felt an arm hook itself around hers, followed by the press of an amply padded bosom. "I was wondering when you would show up." Lady Shiltier's voice rose from beside her. Ludmilla's immediate discomfort mingled with the feeling already present within her, creating a sensation she couldn't quite describe. "Did you have fun with Holniot?" Her liege smiled up at her. "Lord Holniot was a most gracious host, my lady. If possible, I would like to personally convey my thanks for his hospitality." "He was that good, huh? I knew that sort of thing was right up your alley." She tested Lady Shiltier's hold on her. The freedom effect from her ring didn't immediately recognize it as a movement-impairing effect, so it didn't seem that her liege was trying to keep her from getting away. "My lady, I was just about to find a seat for myself. Please do enjoy your time with His Majesty." "Nonsense." Lady Shiltier gave her arm a squeeze. "While Lord Ines may have appreciated your enthusiasm earlier today, you should really offer a proper greeting, don't you think?" And, just like that, she was trapped. Her upbringing demanded that she redeem herself from the previous fiasco. She looked down at Lady Shiltier, who was smiling as brilliantly as ever. "You are doing this on purpose, aren't you?" "Of course I am," Lady Shiltier replied lightly. "But this is for your sake. I truly empathize with how you feel about His Majesty, but you've regressed to how you were back before visiting the Katsa Plains. Imagine if you collapsed into a puddle of your own fluids at some official function of the Sorceress Kingdom." Ludmilla glanced at Lord Mayor, but he showed no visible reaction to Lady Shiltier's words. "Did you have to put it that way, my lady? The imagery is effective, isn't it? Now, let's go and keep Lord Ines company, shall we?" "Ines Summer. How about another?" "How about it, Aura?" "Crap, how is she going to respond?" "Sure." Aura smiled, but then the smile faded. "I wonder if I've eaten too much today. Do you think I'll get fat?" A chuckle rose from Ines's throat, half out of relief that she hadn't replied with something outrageous. "What was I thinking? Aura has always been the dependable sort." At times, it was difficult to imagine that Aura and Mayor had been created by the same person. "It's too early for you to be worrying about that," Ines told her. "You are still growing, after all." Aura's bright smile returned as he patted her head. "That's right," she said, "I'll grow and grow until Shiltier cries tears of frustration." Ines's hand stopped. What did she mean by that? "I just heard something unpleasant, aren't you?" The atmosphere cooled by a degree as Shiltier stepped into the shade of the booth. Aura's stance immediately changed, as if she was preparing to fight for her seat at Ines's side. "It'll be more than unpleasant in 100 years, she said, "just wait and see." As the two locked gazes, Mayor stepped into the tent behind Shiltier, along with the intruder from that morning. Mayor ran over to take the seat on the other side of Ines. White Shiltier was distracted. Baroness Aradnik spread her skirts out into a deep curtsy. "Good evening, Your Majesty. I must apologize for my shameful conduct this morning." "Shameful? Think nothing of it. If anything, your activities turned out to be somewhat useful." The Baroness looked up at him curiously before blushing and turning her gaze away. "Useful, Your Majesty?" Ines nodded. "For instance?" He pondered his selection of examples. Lady Zaradnik was not only a part of the Sorceress Kingdom's middle management, but also a commander of its security forces. It was a combination that one would never find in a corporation on Earth outside of fiction. Admitting that she had helped to identify weaknesses in their defensive schemes wouldn't sound very reassuring. As far as the aesthetic tastes of the locals went, Shiltier's flaws weren't very impressive, either. For instance, we never considered that one would take apart the masonry to fashion improvised traps. That was rather surprising. The young woman's face paled and she turned her gaze down to the stone floor. Please forgive me for my destructive behavior, Your Majesty. I will happily provide compensation for the damage that I've caused. No need, Ainz held out his palm. The damage is trivial and will restore itself in time. But I should still make up for the cost of labor and materials. You misunderstand me, Lady Zaradnik. Damage to Nazarik's structures will magically restore itself. No labor or materials are involved in the process. He wasn't sure if the guild base's features could be considered magic, but he couldn't think of a better term. As far as the natives were concerned, it may as well have been the case. Such a degree of artifice is befitting of a divine domain, Lady Zaradnik said. Once again, I must thank Your Majesty for the invitation and generous hospitality. I've been here for less than a day, yet this has already turned out to be a priceless opportunity to see how I may improve on my own domain. Think nothing of it. You have been good to the children of my friends, so you will always be welcome in this place. Be sure to come and visit once in a while. Ahem, I should see about ordering those hot dogs. Ainz leaned over the railing to speak with Tokitsu. The head chef and his stand hadn't budged from its place below the VIP booth, so it had become something like Ainz Ulgaun's personal hot dog stand. In his haste to move things along, Ainz ordered one for everyone in the booth, including himself. He stared down at the loaded bun in his bejeweled hand. What do I do with this? Furthermore, 3 of the people here are undead. Can those 2 even eat? Never mind, they're eating them. He felt a twinge of envy at Chiltier and the Baroness' ability to eat. Going through the motions of eating was possible for him, but he didn't want to leave a mess of chili, cheese, and onions on the inside of his robes. The head chef has been asking for feedback on these, Ainz said. What do you think, Lady Zaradnik? On the far side of Aura and Chiltier, the young noblewoman stopped mid-chew. Her brown eyes glanced about before she visibly forced down her mouthful. It's very indulgent, Your Majesty. I believe that the hawkers catering to the Grand Arena in our winter aim for something similar. The offerings there fall far short of this, however. This food item feels like it has been painstakingly refined explicitly for occasions like these. He nearly lost the toppings on his hot dog as he listened to Lady Zaradnik's analysis. Aside from the first part, it didn't have to do with the taste at all. Food culture was growing in the Sorceress Kingdom, however, so he was at least somewhat equipped to render an appropriate response. So you think it would be well received in the Sorceress Kingdom? He asked. I was considering the introduction of various dishes with a surplus of available ingredients. Something like this would be considered a luxury by nearly everyone, Lady Zaradnik answered. Short of seasonal festivals, there are very few occasions that would be appropriate for it. It's just a hot dog. What about the league matches? Aura asked. Ainz's non-existent ears perked at the suggestion. League matches? The commanders training in Warden's Vale have practice matches every day, Aura said. Once a week, they have an official league match that people come and watch. The Sorceress Kingdom had a distinct lack of entertainment, particularly for the masses. He struggled to think of special occasions and relevant events, and most of what he anonymously submitted to the suggestion box was met with the withering disapproval of Albedo. Everything that the NPCs came up with grew into over-the-top affairs with his name plastered all over them. Now, out of nowhere, it seemed that Lady Zaradnik had established a sports league, or something close to it. It's nothing special, Your Majesty, Lady Zaradnik said. I just thought it might serve to promote the martial culture in my fief. It's nowhere near as extravagant as this or even what goes on in the Empire. Martial culture? An image of knights at a tourney manifested in his mind. He hadn't been to Zaradnik Barony, but his travels around Riastais and the Empire hadn't shown him much of that either. Then again, territories with a strong martial presence had little need for adventurers, so it was natural he would never frequent them as one. That may be the case for now, Ainz said, but I still think it's a wonderful idea. Who knows, one day it may spread beyond your territory, to other military bases, Your Majesty? I suppose the Frost Giant said something similar before we started in Warden's Vale. How could he explain spectator sports to her? You mentioned the Grand Arena in our winter, he said. Someone once told me that the Imperial Army rarely participates in the matches held there. I believe that's correct, Lady Zaradnik replied. At the same time, however, the Grand Arena is a powerful propaganda tool for the Empire. The matches make violence palpable to the citizenry, bolstering the recruitment efforts of the Imperial Army and causing the people to be more amenable to militaristic expansion and the costs that come with it. The Grand Arena is a platform that glorifies imperial policy on many levels. When she framed it in those terms, he was reminded of a certain ramble by Punitomo about team sports being a conduit for tribalism and nationalism. Before their time, Buenos Aires, a city that once existed in South America, had been destroyed by a thermonuclear device because of a football match. But this world doesn't have anything like that, so shouldn't we take advantage of the benefits? Having a unifying sense of identity in the Sorceress Kingdom isn't necessarily a bad thing, Ainz said. Do you not use these matches for a similar purpose? I do, Your Majesty, Lady Zaradnik admitted. But the military has always been a part of Wardensvale's identity. I am afraid that using the same methods on the rest of the population would lead to public attitudes that run counter to national policy. Countess Corlin has mentioned that the slain theocracy has this exact problem. Is that so? Yes, Your Majesty. Perhaps due to their conflict with the Elf Kingdom in Avasha, belligerent attitudes towards other races were encouraged and allowed to run rampant. As Your Majesty knows, the majority of the theocracy's population has shifted from a human-centric stance to a human supremacist stance. When the Duchy of Eranthal was annexed, Countess Corlin noted that the theocracy's forces posted along the border were just as worried about their own people causing an incident as they were of an undead invasion. I see, Ainz nodded. Then we should proceed carefully on the matter. He would have to consult with the three great minds of Nazarick. Whether they wanted them or not, there were bound to be international conflicts in the future. Using sports to foster a sense of national spirit seemed like a good idea, but the Sorceress Kingdom's population wasn't supposed to demand blood and conquest. Any players who saw that sort of thing would surely use it as a reason to band together with others against them. That matter aside, Your Majesty, the Baroness said, I believe that the culinary artisans in my domain would be very interested in learning how to create such wondrous food. It's just a hot dog, right? Shihotsu Tokitsu, Nazarick's head chef, would be the person to approach regarding that, Ainz said. He's the fellow running the stand below us. I noticed that he's some sort of beastman, a species of orc, perhaps? Close. He is a bork. A bork, how is that written, Your Majesty? Explaining that is just trouble waiting to happen. Upon arriving in their new world, Ainz discovered that many of its races shared the same names as their Yggdrasil counterparts. Fortunately, many of those races didn't know what those names meant. Orcs, for instance, were spelt out using the characters for pig and demon. Of course, calling them pig demons would cause all sorts of problems. Similarly, Tokitsu's race was spelt out as wild pig demon. In other words, a boar demon or bork if one were to follow the same naming sense as orcs. Do you have a problem with orcs and their kin, Lady Zaradnik? No, Your Majesty. It's quite the contrary. A tribe of orc refugees was delivered to my domain during the winter. When they arrived, they said something about being prisoners in the Holy Kingdom and that Your Majesty promised them asylum in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Ah, them. How are they faring these days? To be honest, he had completely forgotten that they existed. He didn't even know where they had ended up, as he had contracted Sheltier to transport them from their prison to conserve mana. The Ganzu tribe's situation has stabilized greatly since then, Lady Zaradnik said. Per Your Majesty's will, I granted them a parcel of unoccupied land large enough to comfortably support their tribe. Then it seems that I have imposed upon you greatly, Lady Zaradnik. Not at all. The Baroness immediately lowered her head. It is my honor to serve Your Majesty. Our issues lie in the fact that, while they have mostly resumed living as they have in the past, they've also seen some of what the Sorceress Kingdom has to offer. Some of those who wish to participate in our society are having trouble finding their place. Hasn't our overarching policy been to let each citizen contribute according to their own ability? Yes, Your Majesty. Unfortunately, the open-ended nature of that policy is both promising and unhelpful at the same time. Many of the things that exist in the Sorceress Kingdom don't even exist as a concept to many of its citizens and so remain outside of their worldview. The vast majority of our citizens have a very narrow worldview overall, so one of the most challenging issues is creating the web of conceptual connections necessary for an individual to know where they stand. I have been doing my best to guide my subjects, which is why I sought to leverage your head chef's expertise. Not only may he serve as an inspiration to the orcs, but he may also be able to help us found an institution for the education of professional cooks and the development of the culinary arts. Somewhat intimidated by the Baroness' ambitious energy, Heinz turned his attention back to the hot dog in his hand. How did it lead to something so grand? On that front, he said, I believe your proposal holds great merit. Now that you've mentioned it, I can't recall the existence of any cooking schools in the region. 2 educational avenues exist for professional cooks in the region. The most common is through the guild system. The other is as a member of the kitchen staff in a wealthy household. I suppose that would explain it. Then we shall be the first. The head chef may participate if he wishes. Also, if you need any materials, equipment, or recipes. I believe that nearly anything from the Great Tomb of Nazarick would be far too advanced for the time being, Your Majesty, Lady Zaradnik said. Building a foundation for the institution is paramount, so I will endeavor to enlist the head chef's assistance. Right. She was that sort of person, wasn't she? He couldn't recall everything from their exploration of the Katza Plains, or most of it, for that matter, but one of the things that truly stuck out about Baroness Zaradnik was the strange pairing between her lofty ambitions and level-headed outlook. It wasn't a personality that existed in Suzuki Satoru's old world. The ambitious on Earth needed to be willing to trample anyone, steal anything, and destroy any obstacles to achieve success. Taking too long to do so would only see someone else steal their work. Everyone else kept their heads down, lest they become collateral damage. A glob of chili dripped off of his hot dog and seeped between the bones of his hand. It was probably a bad idea to foist his food on a group of girls, so he turned to his left. Here you go, Mayor. Thank you, Iron Summer. Mayor received the hot dog with a timid nod. Iron smiled to himself as he watched the boy take a ravenous bite out of it. If you were that hungry, Ein said, you should have joined us at the festival this afternoon. Eh? The dark elf lowered his food and looked up at Heinz in confusion. You know, Ein said, the festival happening along with the tournament? I can't imagine that you weren't aware of it. Aura and I spent the entire afternoon looking around. There were many interesting sights to see and plenty of food stands to try out. But Heinz Summer said. Mayor's eyes glistened with tears. He sent a betrayed expression past Heinz to his sister. Oh Oni-chan. Why didn't you tell me? It's your fault for shutting yourself in as usual, Aura told her brother. You can't just hide with your books all the time. But I've been working hard, too. Mayor cried, I wanted to go to the festival with Heinz Summer. Countless gazes turned in their direction as Mayor's wails rose from the booth. Aura looked away from her brother with a stubborn expression. It's about time to start the first match, she said. You better clean up your face, Mayor. With that, Aura hopped down to the field and made her way to the announcer's platform. Heinz placed a hand on Mayor's shoulder. There, Heinz said. The tournament runs for a week. We'll have plenty of opportunities to visit. Mayor sniffled. Is that a promise? He asked. It's a promise, Heinz answered with a nod. With a resolute expression, Mayor rose from his seat and scrubbed his tear-stained cheeks. Lady Zaradnik's gaze followed him as he left the booth. Is Lord Mayor not spectating the match, Your Majesty? She asked. Mayor is fighting in the first match, Heinz answered. Come to think of it, you wouldn't know about the tournament schedule since you just arrived. Mid-tier matches are in the morning and high-tier matches are in the evening. The tournament format is round-robin, so the competitors are ranked according to their point totals at the end. Then I shouldn't have selfishly taken up his time today, Lady Zaradnik sighed. Who will Lord Mayor be fighting, Your Majesty? Sabos. Tonight's second match will be between Albedo and Cocytus. The Prime Minister will be fighting the Grand Marshal. Heinz chuckled lightly at the Baroness' dubious tone. I suppose it sounds strange to you. Yes, Your Majesty. It isn't unknown for members of a government to possess martial competency, but I've never read or heard of any case where the leader of the king's cabinet duels the head of the military in a tournament match. When you put it that way, I don't recall if you've met Albedo before. I haven't met Her Excellency the Prime Minister personally, Lady Zaradnik replied, but I understand that she is supposed to be some sort of powerful demon who could stand against Moman the Black. Perhaps she's been hiding from Ludmilla, Shiltir said in an amused tone. That being said, I wonder what sort of scheme that woman's been up to. He gave Shiltir the barest of glances. Was it a woman's intuition at work? Unlike most occasions, Irons had a sense of what Albedo was scheming. He remained silent on the matter, however, believing that the Guardian Overseer's ploy would be of greater benefit to Nazarick if it remained a secret. The lighting around the arena dimmed and the excited spectators hushed. Aura hopped down from her referee's platform and walked out onto the middle of the field. Her gaze swept the darkened seating before she raised a microphone, or, rather, a magic item modeled after one, to her hand. "Welcome, one and all, to the opening night of the Nazarick Grand Tournament. Has everyone been having fun?" A cheer rose in the wake of her words, reverberating across the arena. Aura looked up at the crowd with a satisfied nod. Let's all thank Kind Summer for giving us such a wonderful event." The resulting response shook the air and rolled into the night sky. Ein stood to offer a reserved gesture to his far too fervent followers. "All I did was make a suggestion, I didn't do anything at all after that." His emotional suppression triggered to eliminate the overwhelming sense of guilt generated by the undue praise. At this point, the pedestal that Nazarick's denizens placed him on felt like a sophisticated form of bullying. Aura had to thump her mic for nearly a minute to get everyone to quiet down again. "Our first match of the night is a doozy. In the black corner, we have Nazarick's #1 Silver Fox, the Butler of Steel, Sabos Tian. Sabos Summer. Do your best, Sabos Summer." Above the general din, Irons heard the voices of Eclair and his subordinates, along with Pswer and Pestonia in the seats next to them. As far as popularity went, no one really disliked Sabos, but very few were fanatical in their support. "Lord Tian is wildly popular among the women in Nirantal," Lady Zaradnik said. "If the tournament had been held there, he would have received a much more energetic reception." "Is that so?" Irons said. "Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Mayor seems to have a far greater number on his side." "How does she know that?" In the green corner, Aura's voice sounded again. "We have Mayor Summer. Mayor Summer." A great chorus of voices roared out before Aura could finish his introduction. The entire area to the booth's left seemed to erupt in great fervor as the denizens of the 6th floor all at once stood and offered their support for Mayor. Massive banners were raised by treants and smaller beings wildly waved flags with Mayor's face printed on them. What's Yuri doing in that bunch? She's not a part of the 6th floor, why is she cheering for Mayor and not Sabos? Yuri did work with children a lot, so maybe that was it. One wasn't obliged to cheer for employees in the same department, after all. Anyway, Aura shouted into her mic, "In the green corner, we have Nazarick's #1 crybaby, Mayor Bellofiore." "Oh, Oni-chan. That's not what I wrote for my introduction." "I know." Aura grinned. For the second time that evening, Mayor sent a look of tearful betrayal at his sister. "Oni-chan," he said as he raised his staff into the air, "you big dummy." Raging torrents of mystical energy swirled in the air over the arena, coalescing into a vortex of power that illuminated the arena like a second sun. Aura looked up, her mouth falling open. "Mayor, you petty catastrophe." Aura dove to the side as the maelstrom of energy came crashing down. She rolled over the sand once before vaulting herself into the air with her free hand and landing on her feet. "Match start," she shouted into her mic before leaping away. "That Mayor," Irons grumbled, "he overdid it." "He is a boy, after all," Lady Zaradnik said. "After getting embarrassed like that, it's not surprising that he lashed out." "Is that so?" The Baroness looked over at him curiously, then just as quickly averted her gaze. "It is the case in my humble experience, Your Majesty. Perhaps it isn't so with elves." As far as Suzuki Satoru's experiences went, society frowned upon aggressive tendencies in its members. Any children who acted up were quickly medicated and their parents were charged for the treatment. The cost of that, of course, would bankrupt any regular person, so parents made extra sure that their children wouldn't put the family's finances at risk with undesirable behavior. Down on the field, Sabos was patiently waiting on his side of the arena while Mayor calmed down. Irons pondered the outcome of the duel. He was certain that Mayor would win at first, but expending a huge chunk of his mana on petty catastrophe significantly altered the odds. "No, Mayor still has the advantage, doesn't he? That touch me was damn cheap when it came to equipping Sabos." Rather than purposely skimping out on Sabos items, Touch Me's priority was making sure he looked like a butler. Stationed as he was behind Nazarik's ultimate line of defense, no one expected any of the NPCs placed on the 9th and 10th floors to put up much of a fight against any invading force that broke through. Of course, the other guild members who designed NPCs on those same floors at least put some effort into properly equipping their creations. Touch Me, however, reasoned that being a monk was enough to get by. As such, he crafted item frames that most closely portrayed what he imagined a butler should look like and didn't use any top-tier materials or data crystals to craft them. This would have landed most characters in a pitiful state, but Touch Me was right that being a monk made up for basic equipment shortfalls. To top it off, Sabos' race was very strong in the natural equipment department. Unfortunately, it probably wasn't enough to overcome one of the strongest floor guardians of Nazarik. How would I win if I were him? Monks were usually a terror for magic casters to deal with, but Sabos' equipment situation meant that he didn't have the obscene magical defenses that a player monk would. His best bet would be to close the gap while using skills to weather Mare's spells. Once he got into melee range, he couldn't grapple his opponent since Mare likely had a freedom effect active, but Sabos could pummel him with a non-stop barrage of unarmed attacks. Trying to cast normally through a monk's insane attack speed was nigh impossible, so Mare would need to rely on his arsenal of druid abilities and meta magic. With a good portion of his mana already spent, the druid would be in big trouble unless he pulled off something ingenious. Then, Mare said in a quavering voice, "Here I come." Sabos raised his gloved fists and dropped into a balanced stance. Mare pointed his staff at his opponent. Reverse gravity. The monk punched downward in an attempt to create a handhold in the ground, but he fell upward at the same time. As Sabos went into the air, Mare cast another spell. Triplet Maximize Magic, Sunbeam. Brilliant light lanced out from the shadow of Yggdrasil. Unable to control his trajectory, Sabos took the beam forlorn but managed to shield his eyes to avoid being blinded. Oof, Sheltier made a face. It's a good thing that Sabos isn't undead. It's still an effective combo, Ein said. With Sabos falling up through the air like that, he can't dodge the beams. As they spoke, another beam struck the hapless monk. Eins frowned as the third beam hit Sabos, who was by now several hundred meters in the air. Why are the beams still hitting him? He should be out of range. Wow, that's dirty. Eins furrowed his non-existent brow as Mare turned into an anti-air battery 100 times more powerful than an archaeology's defense lasers. Much like the first-tier spell Magic Arrow, the 7th-tier Sunbeam allowed the caster to emit an additional beam for every tier of the caster. The difference was that each beam could be independently used at will and was far more powerful than a Magic Arrow. Since the spell only checked to see if the target was in range upon casting, it didn't matter how far away they were after the fact. To top it off, it wasn't a channeled spell, meaning that Mare was free to cast other spells even while attacking Sabos with additional beams, and he was doing exactly that. Greater Stone Skin, Magic Shield, Power of G. A dark streak fell out of the sky, smashing into Mare and throwing a cloud of dust and debris high into the air. Looks like Sabos assumed his racial form to fly out of Mare's reverse gravity effect. Eins leaned forward, trying to see what was happening, but the only thing he could make out was the sound of a violent scuffle. A moment later, Mare flew across the field, bouncing several times as he tumbled through the dirt. He started to get back to his feet, but Sabos, who had reverted to his human form, was on Mare in a split second. Owie! Mare's head snapped to the side as the monk caught him in the face with a flying kick. The dark elf druid fell to the ground again. He curled up into a trembling little ball, trying to shield his head with his arms. It hurts. Sabos' fist froze mid-swing. Mare looked up at him with tears in his eyes. Sabos-san, it hurts. Whispers started to rise from the crowd. The poor boy. Look at how much blood is on Sabos Summer's gloves. Mare Summer's beautiful face is ruined. How could he? Oh, Mare Summer. Should an adult be beating on a child like that? They're both the same age, just so you know. Of course, no one would think that given what was happening in front of their eyes. A powerful man in his prime was beating a little boy bloody. As with Suzuki Satoru's world, it seemed that image was everything. I sent my footman to train at Lord Tian's dojo, Lady Zaradnik said. I hope he isn't teaching them anything problematic. An awkward atmosphere fell over the arena. Sabos lowered his fist and straightened the lapels of his coat. I shall concede this match, he said. Or a look down from her judge's stand. Winner, Mayor Belofiore. Sabos' exit was accompanied by polite applause. Hines could only scratch his head at Mayor's ingenious victory.